He stole my project, took my promotion, and laughed while I packed my things. 6 months later, I walked back into his boardroom. Not as his employee, but as the hidden owner who now controlled everything he ever wanted. The morning London skyline glittered like polished steel as Clara Hastings crossed the glass lobby of Monarch Estates. The air smelled of espresso, ambition, and something less tangible, fear. It was the final week before the Regent Project presentation, the company's most ambitious development to date, a £2 billion high-rise in the heart of Knightsbridge. And for the last 3 years, Clara had given her soul to it. Her reflection in the mirrored wall, sleek navy suit, hair pinned into an assertive twist, eyes sharpened by years of quiet endurance, was the image of control. Yet beneath it was exhaustion. She'd worked endless nights drafting plans, negotiating with investors, calming architects, and cleaning up after her reckless deputy, Ethan Ward. Ethan was charming. Everyone said that. The kind of man who turned boardroom tension into laughter with one perfectly timed quip. But Clara had learned that charm was his weapon. He was the CEO's golden boy, ambitious, cunning, and ruthless. He wanted what she had, and she could feel him circling closer every day. At 8:15 a.m., she stepped into the conference room. The model of the Regent Tower stood on the table, a miniature monument to her sleepless nights. She adjusted a light beam on its glass facade just as the door opened. "Morning, Clara," Ethan said, flashing that easy grin. His tie was loose, his posture casual, the kind of carelessness that came from privilege. "Big day. Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 2 years," she said, not looking at him. He chuckled softly. "Let's just make sure the board sees that." She knew what he meant. Let's make sure they see you as competent, but not indispensable. He had a talent for turning every success into his stepping stone. At 9 o'clock sharp, the boardroom filled. Leather chairs creaked, and the air hummed with power. Monarch Estates was run by James Caldwell, a billionaire CEO who built his empire from nothing but concrete and audacity. He was in his late 60s now, still sharp, but leaning heavily on advisors. Ethan had charmed him, too. Clara began her presentation, a detailed vision of the Regent Project's sustainability features, cost breakdown, and luxury positioning. She spoke with precision, confidence, and quiet authority. When she finished, the room erupted in polite applause. Even Caldwell looked impressed. But then Ethan stood. "If I may, sir," he said smoothly, "I'd like to add something. Clara and I have been collaborating closely, and I've taken the liberty of expanding the investor strategy section." He projected a new slide, one she'd never seen before. It detailed investor allocations, financial models, and risk mitigation plans, the exact confidential data Clara had been refining for weeks. Her notes, her work, and he was presenting it as his. She froze. Her pulse hammered as he spoke effortlessly, feeding the room every detail she'd prepared in private. Each phrase, each projection, hers. When he finished, Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Excellent initiative, Ethan. Impressive grasp of the numbers." Ethan smiled. "Thank you, sir." Of course, Clara's guidance helped. She's been a great support. Support. Not a partner. Not led. Just support. The words sliced deeper than she expected. After the meeting, she confronted him in the corridor. "You stole my report." He turned, his expression infuriatingly calm. "I used it for the good of the company." "You used it to make yourself look good." "Come on, Clara," he said, lowering his voice. "We're on the same team. Besides, you're not leadership material. You're great at detailed work. Leave the vision to me." Her breath caught. "Leadership material? I've been running this project while you flirt with investors." He stepped closer, eyes gleaming. "And that's why I'll always be ahead. Because people like me, Clara. You think this business is about spreadsheets and ethics? It's about relationships, politics, power." He smiled, a predator's smile. "Don't take it personally." 2 weeks later, she received the email. Subject: Leadership Restructure, Regent Project. Dear Clara, as part of our new strategic direction, effective immediately, Ethan Ward will assume leadership of the Regent project. Your contributions have been invaluable. We'd like to reassign you to a supporting advisory role. Regards, James Caldwell. She read it twice, numb. Then again, slower, as if the meaning might change. Supporting advisory role. Demoted. Stripped of everything she'd built. Her vision blurred. Around her, the office hummed with casual indifference, interns laughing near the copier, phones ringing, the city's skyline taunting her from behind the glass. That afternoon, she packed her things, silent, invisible. Ethan passed by her desk, whispering, "Don't look so defeated. You'll land on your feet." Then he laughed. That low, satisfied laugh that would echo in her mind for weeks. That was the moment something inside her cracked. Not from weakness, but awakening. For the first time in years, Clara stopped pretending. She spent the following weeks in silence, at home, alone in her small flat overlooking the Thames. Her world had shrunk from skyscrapers to shadows. Yet in that stillness, a thought began to form. You don't destroy a predator by fighting fair. One night, while scrolling through old company files she backed up for reference, she noticed something strange. A file directory Ethan had carelessly left open during his tenure as her deputy. Inside were confidential communications between him and Caldwell's legal team, discussing off-the-book commissions, investor kickbacks, and illegal property acquisitions hidden under shell companies. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was corruption. She printed every document, every transfer record, every signed memo, each a piece of the puzzle. Ethan hadn't just stolen her position, he'd been laundering deals under Monarch's nose. That night, she stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker on the Thames. A plan began to form. A month later, word spread that Monarch Estates was courting new investment from a mysterious holding firm, Aurelia Capital Group. Whispers filled the boardroom corridors. No one knew who owned it, but Caldwell was desperate. The Regent project's costs had ballooned, and Ethan's management was proving disastrous. Clara watched from afar. Aurelia Capital's name began to dominate industry headlines, offering massive financial injections into prime London developments. But no one had met its elusive director. Not even Caldwell. And that was how she wanted it. She'd spent the last month quietly building Aurelia Capital through silent partnerships and shell investments, using the very knowledge she'd gained from Monarch. The files Ethan left behind became her blueprint, exposing his weaknesses, his debts, and his illegal dealings. While he strutted in boardrooms, she was buying his downfall, one share at a time. By the end of the fiscal quarter, Aurelia Capital had quietly acquired 22% of Monarch Estates. Enough to call a vote. Enough to change everything. The boardroom was filled to capacity that morning, executives, investors, legal advisors. The tension was thick as Caldwell took his seat at the head of the table. Ethan sat beside him, smirking, adjusting his cufflinks like a man who'd already won. "Gentlemen," Caldwell began, "we're here to welcome Aurelia Capital, our newest and largest investor. Their director will join us today via proxy." Ethan leaned back, whispering, "Some anonymous hedge fund, probably." He didn't see the figure entering behind him until the room fell silent. He turned and froze. Clara Hastings stood in the doorway, poised, composed, wearing a black tailored suit and an expression carved from glass. Every eye followed her as she walked to the head of the table. Caldwell blinked. "Clara, what are you?" She smiled faintly. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. I believe I'm the director you've been expecting." A stunned silence fell over the room. Ethan's smirk collapsed. What are you talking about?" She placed a folder on the table. "Aurelia Capital is fully owned by me. Over the last quarter, I've acquired 22% of Monarch Estates. Effective immediately, I have the right to call a leadership vote." Caldwell's pen dropped. You bought into Monarch?" She met Ethan's gaze, calm, cold, final. "You took my position and laughed. Now you'll watch me take everything." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. The same arrogance that once fueled him now looked like fear. Clara turned to the board. "I call for a vote to remove Mr. Ward as project lead, pending investigation of his unauthorized financial dealings. Evidence will be provided to legal counsel. The board erupted in murmurs. Ethan lunged forward. You can't do this. She smiled. I already have. The silence after Clara's declaration was heavy, electrifying, the kind that settled before an explosion. Ethan Ward sat rigid in his chair, his jaw tightening, his breath shallow. Around him, members of the Monarch Estates board exchanged wary glances. A few of them had long admired Clara's brilliance, but had never dared to take sides when she was cast aside. Now she stood before them as something far more dangerous than a disgraced employee. She was a shareholder. And not just any shareholder, the largest private investor in the company. Miss Hastings, said James Caldwell, his voice measured but cautious, this is unexpected. You're saying Aurelia Capital, your company, owns a controlling stake in Monarch. Clara nodded once. That's correct, Mr. Caldwell. The official records were filed last week with Companies House. I have full documentation. She slid a sleek black folder across the table. Pages 3 through 6 detail my holdings, verified by your own legal counsel. The legal advisor, a stoic man in a gray suit, flipped through the papers, his expression hardening with each page. Finally, he looked up and nodded. It checks out, sir. Caldwell's lips tightened. Ethan, desperate, leaned toward him. She's bluffing. She can't. Sit down, Mr. Ward, Caldwell snapped. Clara's calm voice sliced through the tension. You've made quite an impression, Ethan. But I'm afraid your tenure here is over. He turned toward her, his composure cracking. You think you can walk in here, wave some paperwork, and destroy everything I've built? She tilted her head slightly. Everything you've built? Let's be clear. You built nothing. You stole my work, my credibility, my place. And you did it with a smile. He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. Unfortunately for you, I've spent the last 6 months uncovering where your real creativity went, into offshore accounts, shell property purchases, and fraudulent contractor deals. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. One of the senior partners, Martin Price, cleared his throat. Are you implying embezzlement, Miss Hastings? I'm not implying, she replied. I'm confirming. She opened another folder, this one marked Confidential Investigations, Monarch Estates, E. Ward. Inside were printed bank records, email screenshots, and internal communications. Ethan's face was drained of color. You hacked me? No, she said coolly. You were careless. You used company devices for personal gain, left files unsupervised, and sent encrypted data through unsecured Wi-Fi at the Savoy. You practically handed me your sins. The board members leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Clara looked directly at Caldwell. You once told me loyalty is the foundation of leadership. Ethan has been using your company's reputation to launder funds through fake vendors. I have evidence of £7.4 million in diverted assets. Caldwell's face turned pale. Good God. Ethan pushed his chair back violently. This is a setup. Clara smiled faintly. That's the thing about truth, Ethan. It doesn't need setup, just exposure. The meeting adjourned for 30 tense minutes. Ethan paced the hallway outside, his phone glued to his ear, whispering frantically into it. He was calling someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a friend. Clara sat calmly by the window, watching the city stretch beneath her, the skyline that had once seemed unreachable, now lying quietly under her control. When the board reconvened, Caldwell's voice was heavy but decisive. In light of the evidence presented, and after consultation with our legal counsel, I'm calling for an immediate vote on Mr. Ethan Ward's removal from his position as project lead, pending investigation for financial misconduct. Ethan slammed his fist on the table. You can't. Caldwell raised his hand sharply. Enough. Clara remained silent as the vote began. Martin Price? In favor of removal. Sarah Trent? In favor. One by one, the hands rose. Ethan's eyes darted desperately across the room, searching for an ally, finding none. Finally, Caldwell's hand went up. In favor. He turned toward Ethan. You're relieved of your duties effective immediately. Ethan stood slowly, his jaw trembling. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice venomous. "All of you." Then his eyes locked on Clara. "You think you've won? You think sitting in that chair makes you powerful? You're still the same woman who begged me for approval." Clara didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eyes.
"No, Ethan."
"I'm the woman who stopped begging." By the end of the week, Ethan was gone. Officially, he had resigned due to personal reasons, though the whispers circulating around London's property circles told a different story of fraud, deceit, and a humiliating downfall. Monarch's PR department scrambled to contain the fire, but the damage was done. Clara didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Revenge, she realized, wasn't about gloating. It was about balance, restoring what had been wrongfully taken. Caldwell called her into his office 3 days later. The old man looked weary, but relieved. "Clara," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I owe you an apology. I trusted the wrong person. I underestimated you." She smiled faintly. "I appreciate that, sir. But I don't need an apology. I need a seat at the table. Permanently." He nodded slowly. "You'll have it. Effective immediately. You're reinstated as executive director of the Regent Project. And, if you're open to it, I'd like you to serve as co-managing partner of Monarch Estates." For a moment, Clara said nothing. The words sank in, deep and real. She'd climbed every rung of this corporate tower and been kicked down each one. Now she was being asked to own it. She extended her hand. "Deal." But the story didn't end with a promotion. Ethan Ward was a man who couldn't let go, not of pride, not of revenge. A month later, Clara received a call from an anonymous number. "Clara Hastings," said a clipped voice. "Detective Holloway, Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to speak with you regarding your former colleague, Ethan Ward." She met them at Scotland Yard that afternoon. The detective handed her a file. Inside were documents she had never seen, evidence that Ethan had attempted to transfer company funds into an overseas account after his dismissal. Only this time he'd been caught. "He's facing criminal charges," Holloway said. "But I understand you were the one who initially exposed his activities. You've done us, and a lot of investors, a favor." When she left the building, the London rain began to fall, soft, cleansing. For the first time in years, she walked without looking over her shoulder. 3 months later, the Regent Tower finally broke ground. At the launch gala, a lavish event at the Royal Albert Hall, reporters swarmed the red carpet, cameras flashing as CEOs and investors arrived. But when Clara stepped out of her car in a midnight blue gown, the entire crowd seemed to pause. She wasn't the assistant anymore. She was the story. A journalist rushed up. "Miss Hastings, word is you've led Monarch Estates to record-breaking profits after restructuring. What's your secret?" Clara smiled for the cameras. "Resilience," she said simply. "And knowing when silence speaks louder than confrontation." Inside, Caldwell gave a speech thanking his new management team. When he introduced Clara as co-managing partner, the applause was thunderous. She stood at the podium, gazing over a sea of faces, some respectful, some envious, some quietly afraid. Her voice was steady. "When people ask me what it takes to survive in business, I tell them integrity. Because power without integrity always collapses. Eventually." She caught a glimpse of a familiar figure at the far end of the hall, Ethan, standing in the shadows near the exit, looking disheveled, older, defeated. Their eyes met for a brief, electric second. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. He turned and disappeared into the night. Later that evening, after the gala ended, Clara returned to her penthouse overlooking the Thames, the same river she once watched from her small flat, dreaming of justice. She poured herself a glass of wine and opened her laptop. The screen glowed softly, illuminating a series of corporate documents under Aurelia Capital Group. She scrolled down to a single line, majority shareholder, C. Hastings, 22%, and smiled. Then she clicked a second folder, pending acquisitions. At the top of the list, Monarch Estates, remaining 28% shares. She wasn't done yet. Owning a fifth of Monarch had been revenge. Owning all of it, that would be legacy. Her phone buzzed. A message from Caldwell appeared. You were right about Ethan. Thank you for saving the Monarch. You've earned everything you have, Clara. I'm proud to have you as my partner. She smiled faintly and typed back. Thank you, James. But I didn't save Monarch. I rebuilt it. 6 months later, the skyline of London shimmered under the dawnlight. At the very top floor of the Regent Tower, now nearing completion, Clara stood by the glass, watching cranes move like patient giants. The tower would soon be the tallest residential building in Europe, a symbol of her rise, her endurance, her revenge. A young executive entered the office. Miss Hastings, the final investor agreements are ready for signature. She turned and nodded.
Good.
And the Aurelia transfer? All complete, he said, handing her the documents. You now officially own 51% of Monarch Estates. She signed the papers calmly, then looked out again at the city. Once, she'd been a name buried under someone else's shadow. Now she was the shadow and the light. She whispered softly to no one in particular. You took my position, Ethan. But you gave me purpose. And that's something you'll never understand. Outside, the sun broke through the London clouds, casting a golden reflection across the tower's mirrored surface, the same surface that once reflected her defeat. Now, it reflects victory.